In the first common problems video I did, I focused on various subjects, but in this one I'm going to focus on two. Now this Hornby 31 with Mazak Rot has been sent to me as a donation by Keith to see if I can do anything with it, and unfortunately not. This is a source of spare parts. Now in the first video I didn't actually have a Mazak Rot model to show you, so I'm going to show you this one. Now to be honest, this has fared quite lightly on the body shell. It is broke just there near that door pillar, and one of the screw retainers has broke inside the body, but apart from that the body shell has fared pretty well. There's one of the retainers broke in there, just there, as you can see. But the chassis itself is absolutely hammered, and I'm going to show you that, and I'm going to show how, one, how easy it is that this Mazak Rot breaks up, and two, what spares we can get off this model. Now you can see the cracking and crazing all over the chassis. The buffer beams and cab floors have already broken. Just look at that crazing on there. That is all Mazak Rot. So I'm going to strip this down. Now the first thing I'm going to do, you can see there, look how it's bending that plastic retainer up as well. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove these black plastic wire retainers, put them to one side, and then I'm going to be able to remove this cab floor buffer beam assembly. Now there are some valuable spares on here. This cab floor has absolutely had it, but removing these screws allows us to remove the lighting circuit, so I'm going to keep those. The buffers also pull out. 3 out of the 4 buffers on this model were salvageable. One of them was stuck in and it broke, but these two are alright. You can also remove the coupling assembly and the buffer beam cowlings, as these are separate and screwed in place. Now people might wonder why you do this, but when you repair or do models like this, it's always handy to have a stock of spares, especially Hornby spares, as they can be quite expensive. So the cab floor lifts off and the coupling assembly is removed, and that's all salvageable, but this cab floor and buffer beam area is not. And you can see just how easy the cab floor breaks up. It is it's made the metal go almost biscuit like. So now I'm going to set about stripping the chassis. I'm not going to go through the whole thing with you, I'm just going to summarise it, but I remove all these black tabs so that the wires can just pull free, because they're not soldered on this model or on any Hornby diesels of this era. The PCB is held in place with 2 screws, and luckily enough it's not broken. PCBs themselves are quite expensive from Hornby spares, and now we've got a 31 PCB here, so that will go into my spare stash. So there's 25 quid's worth there. And then I'm going to strip the rest of the model down by removing all the screws. The bogies themselves are unclipped from the inside. Removing these retaining pieces, then the bogie will fall out along with the pickup wires. There's no metal on the bogies at all apart from the wheels, so they are in very good order for spares. They'll just need a service and clean it. So I've got 2 spare bogies. The fan unit and everything else just unscrews, as does the other cab floor. And that leaves us with just the motor. Now, the motor should be snug, but this one actually moves up and down, as you can see, and that is because it's swollen. You can see there that the Mazak Rot has caused that to swell. And this motor now, look, if I move it with the pliers, it moves up and down. And that's because it's swollen and opened up. Now that should be tight in there. To remove the motor, you need to prise off the battery box, and this will just, hopefully it will just unclip. It's very tight because of that expanded metal, but that lifts off. And then to remove the motor, that's another spare part. These rubber lugs are just pushed through. Now this was very loose. This is the loosest one of these I've ever done. But once they're out, the motor falls out, and that is the chassis completely stripped of spares. And this chassis really has had it. It is cracked all over. It's one of the worst examples I've ever seen. And I'll just show you now, look, with the pliers, it just breaks up. It's like shortbread. That's the only way I can describe it, the texture wise, is the metal has gone almost like a biscuit, and it breaks so easily. And I've just slowed this footage down, look, and you watch that. I'll break all this apart just with these pliers, and then in a minute it just goes boom, and the chassis snaps completely in half. Look at that, look. It really is a pest. Well, it's zinc pest, but it really is a pain. So if you are thinking of buying a second-hand Hornby 31, 50 or class 60, it is worth checking. And you can see, look, it just falls to bits now. It's just, look, I shouldn't be able to do that with my hands with metal. It's, like I said, it's gone like a biscuit. But do please check. It is a very common problem with early models. I will relink the list to the RM web page in the description of the affected models, and there are so many of them now. Even Bachmann locos are starting to show it, split box 37s especially. But it's crazy to think that this was once metal, and just so some impurities has led to this just crumbling away as it is. However, on the bright side, we have managed to salvage a lot of parts, and there's a lot of money's worth there if you were to buy it as separate parts. The motor does work, and I will test it now with a battery, although I should have took those drive shaft connectors off, because when I put the battery on it they fly off anyway. But the motor works, and the motors, these type of motors, are quite expensive. You've got a PCB, fan unit, cows, buffers, 3 out of the 4 ain't bad, screw sets, light units, 2 bogies, and of course, luckily with this model, we've still got the body shell, cab light units, bulkheads, etc. I have seen it where the bodies have actually been so badly destroyed they're unsalvageable, but luckily with this one that Keith sent me, I can reuse that in the future. So that's, weirdly, this cab floor doesn't suffer from Mazak rot. That's pretty good, but I'll keep an eye on that. So that's Mazak rot. Now the second thing I want to talk to you about in this video about common problems is Flying Scotsmans and Tornadoes. Now these 2 models have been sent to me by Dan, and both of them have the same motor and both of them have the same problem. And again, it is a very common problem with Scotsman and Tornado, and I've repaired countless ones of these since I've been doing trash to track. So it has this motor, this type of motor, with the motor mount sandwiched between the motor and the flywheel. And I will demonstrate on the Tornado. I've already removed the body shell, the body securing screw, which goes in there, and then it unclips from the back. But what I'm going to do, I've already started to take this apart before filming. But what I'm going to do is to take it apart, you have to undo 2 retaining screws from that motor mount that allows the motor to be removed. You can also remove that motor housing that it sits in. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate the problem. Here's a spare one. I'm going to fit this to repair Dan's models for him. But I'm going to remove, as I was saying, you remove the 2 screws and the motor lifts out. It also allows you to remove this motor or gearbox housing, which allows you access to the idler gear, which is always handy to check, because these, again, as featured in the first video, these are prone to splitting, although this one's okay. So I'm going to put some power leads to this motor. I can just hook it on there. And as you'll hear when I turn the controller on, it will run for a few seconds and then die. So the controller's still on, it's on full power, and the motor just dies. There is a small whiff of white smoke, but nothing, the motor's dead. So I'm going to have a look at this. I'm going to show you how to change it. Then I'm going to open this motor up to see if we can find out what's wrong. So to change the motor over, it is quite simple. You just have to desolder the wires off the suppressor unit. The red one on this one goes towards the bottom of the suppressor. So that's the old motor removed. Simply bring the new motor in out of this packet and reconnect those wires. Now there was a time when these motors were very, very hard to come by, but at the moment, at the time of filming in July 2025, there does seem to be a good stock of them online. So you just bend the suppressor forwards as the original was, so it fits inside the body shell. And then it's a case of reattaching those 2 wires with a little touch of solder. If you're not confident in doing this yourself, obviously you can send it in to me and I'll do it for you. But reattach the wires, just like so. And then when both wires are reattached, I'll get the black one there. Just a simple touch onto that suppressor with a small amount of solder. Just gently touching it so not too much heat transfers to the suppressor unit. And then that is that motor replaced. Now I'm going to put a red mark on the flywheel there, just so you guys at home can see when it's turning round, because it's not always obvious when it's brass. Put a battery on the track, boom, away it goes. So quiet, smooth, lovely running. Leave the battery on, it's not showing any signs of slowing down, no white smoke or anything like that. So this motor's all good to go, and that's Dan's Tornado virtually repaired. But before I do anything else, as I usually do on Trash to Track, I'm going to put a small amount of oil on the bearings on the motor using this Fleischmann pin dropper that I've got. So just put some in there. And like I said, I've repaired loads of these Flying Scotsmans and Tornadoes, and most of them have had the same problem. And it's always been a case of trying to replace these motors. One other thing I do is I'm going to put some Hobby Lube white PTFE grease on the idler gear, just to put some fresh lubrication on it. Now I've used this time. I know some people can't get hold of Labelle 106, but this Hobby Lube is readily available, so I use that just as well. So the gearbox cover then goes back on. That slots into 2 slots in the die-cast, and the motor goes in. Now that plastic covering on the motor is a D shape, and it will only go in one way, so make sure you line it up correctly. And then it's a case of just putting the 2 securing screws back in, and that's Dan's Tornado fixed with a brand new motor. So I'll just secure that back into position. The Flying Scotsman at the rear was done exactly the same. The chassis isn't identical, but the procedure is exactly the same as you've just seen me do. And now with the battery test, it's running lovely and everything is fine. So there we go. That is another common problem with these motors. This Flying Scotsman that Dan sent needed the cylinders and rodding sorting out, but because that was damage done, the motor in this had also failed. Now I'm going to take one of these motors apart, see if we can identify why they keep failing, because I've had several of these fail. And the first thing I'm going to do is try and get one of my gear pullers around this flywheel, which was easier said than done, but I got there in the end. And then just screw the gear puller down, and I'm going to remove the flywheel, which will also remove the motor mount. I mean, it is a bit of a daft idea having the motor mount sandwiched between the flywheel and the motor in the first place. It's a bit of a poor design choice by Hornby, but the flywheel comes off relatively easy. A lot easier than the worm gear. The worm gear was horrendous to get off. But there's the motor mount. And that will allow me to open the motor up. So you open this up by removing those 2 squeezed in tabs on the plastic part. And the actual worm gear I ended up clamping in a vise and tapping out with a small nail and a hammer, because my gear puller just would not pull it off. Once that's removed, you can remove the commutator and the armature, all as one piece here. 3-pole motor. So I'm going to give this a bit of a clean up and see if it is just a build up of dirt that this worm gear here is knackered because I crushed it in a vise. But I'm going to give it a clean up, as I said, just to see if it's a build up of dirt that's causing these motors to fail. So usual method, anybody that's watched Trash to Track will know how I clean these up. Commutator was polished up with a cotton bud and mess. I made sure to clean all the gaps out on the commutator to make sure that everything was as clean as possible. Give this motor every possible chance of restarting when I reassemble it. So the gaps were cleaned out. And there we are. There's the commutator all clean. The windings are still soldered. Everything looks to be okay. There is a couple of burn marks on there, burnish marks, but I couldn't get those off. And then the brush assembly, these tiny brushes were also given a clean. Now this cotton bud has actually got contact cleaner sprayed onto it. So I'll just turn that around in there gently and clean the brushes. And you can see there's quite a bit of dirt and carbon coming off them. So the brushes don't show signs of excessive wear, so this motor should have many more hours of life left to it. So I'm going to try and reassemble the motor. So you put the commutator back in, and just using this small pin, manipulate the brushes around the commutator so it sits back as it should. The motor housing goes back on when that magnet is strong in there. Push it in and then fold the 2 tabs back over. These are the tabs that I undid earlier. So they just fold back over, and then testing it with a power lead again. Here we go. The motor starts up but fails again. So it definitely wasn't a build-up of dirt. So what I do, I've just tested that, and this is pretty much real time. I unfold those tabs again, take the commutator out, and when I take the commutator out, put my hands on it, that one coil there is so hot. The others aren't, but that one is. So this is a failed coil. The coils are failing on these motors. Cheaply made in China. I just don't know what to say. Hornby should be investing better, to be honest. This is the disassembled motor. There's no point in keeping any of this for spares, because to get the worm drive off, you just can't do it without damaging it. Hornby need to up their game and stop using these cheaply made motors, because the amount that have failed is just unbelievable. So if you buy a Flying Scotsman or a Hornby Tornado at a toy fair or swap meet, and it's post 2010, make sure it's given a good test run, not just up and down like this. You need to see it running for a while to make sure that motor isn't going to fail. All I'm doing here is showing you that the repaired two locos that I've done for Dan, Tornado and the Flying Scotsman with its new cylinders. So yeah, there we go. Two of the common problems that I've found with Hornby models. This horrible, horrible motor. And again, watch out for Mazak Rot. So thank you all for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and I'll catch you all in the next video. Bye for now.